Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. As we all know for a fact that after the successful completion of the standby arrangement with the IMF and Pakistani authorities are in negotiations for a larger and a longer extended fund facility program. Regarding that, Pakistan's Finance Minister Mohammad Aurangzeb has said, let me quote him, I am very optimistic that we will be able to take it through to the finish line for an extended fund program, larger and longer in nature. Unquote. The finance minister has also at the same time hoped that this would be the last IMF program. While addressing a presser at the end of the fiscal year 2023 and 24, the finance minister has reiterated three principles regarding this year's budget, which include raising tax to GDP ratio, energy sector reforms and privatizing state-owned enterprises. He has also talked about the cuts in spending in PSDP, pensions and redundant departments. Also, the monthly economic update and outlook for the month of June says the outgoing fiscal year witnessed moderate recovery. Will also be talking about important things highlighted in that particular monthly report. Also, Federal Board of Revenue has achieved the revenue collection target for the fiscal year 2023 and 24, registering a 30% increase. Also, after President Zardari gave assent to the Finance Bill 2024, Pakistan's stock exchanges witnessed a bullish trend and surged over 79,536.23 points. All these important matters are for discussion in today's show. For that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Dr. Shujat Farooq. He is Chief of Research at Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. Dr. Farooq, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Dr. Manzoor Ahmad. He is Member Task Force on FPR and Tax Reforms and former Ambassador to the World Trade Organization. Dr. Ahmad, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Let me begin the discussion with you, Dr. Farooq. Now, the Finance Minister in this particular presser will be talking about that very hope he has expressed regarding acquiring that larger and longer IMF Extended Fund Facility Program. But starting the discussion with this important pledge he has made to take the tax to GDP ratio up to 13% in next 3 years. Now, three major principles of this year's budget: raising tax to GDP ratio. This particular pledge belongs to the first of the three principles. What major steps are required to take it to 13% in the next 3 years?
Thank you, Joseph. I think if you look the past 9 months to 12 years when we went in this standby program, we have taken lot of measures. And even you can see in the recent budget where we have a certain shift in our tax policy as well as in our expenditure policy. And the broader element, that is the commitment with IMF, that is quite simple, that we have to raise our revenues and we have to reduce our taxes. So you can see, for example, over the last 1 year that we have a significant shift in our tax policy. For example, you can see in recent monthly outlook that our tax revenues that have increased by 30.8%. So that is a quite big number. And similarly, yes, absolutely, another indicator you can see, that is the non-tax revenues that increased by around 95.8%. So government is trying to reduce the primary deficit. So basically right now the primary deficit that is in surplus. So primary deficit is basically current expenditures and current revenues. So that is a success story, that you can see that right now around 2.4 trillion is primary surplus. Previous year this primary surplus was just 0.4% of GDP, and this year it is around 2% of GDP. So this is commitment that has been reflected in recent budget, that we will shift the tax, because you know that there is some skewness in our taxes. For example, you can see that more burden is on indirect taxes and some other sort of customs taxes. So government is pledging that in this coming year they will increase the direct taxes by 48%, and you can see that there is a certain pressure that we have to enhance the filer rate that is currently around just 5 million out of this 240 million population. And similarly, indirect taxes, there would be increased by 35%. On the other hand, you know that government is trying to curtail the expenditure. So I think it is a long waiting requirement that our tax to GDP ratio that must be increased. There are positive indicators. Absolutely, the government has shown this commitment in the budget. So I am quite sure that we are already doing these steps over the last 9 months. 12 month, you can see that, and in this budget you can see that the government has also you know that abolished certain exemptions in certain subsidies, and you know that they are trying to uniform the tariff, etc. So definitely I hope that
so when you talk about the overall positive indicators, what key indicators do you consider of utmost significance regarding as to the prudent policies brought in by the government and the authorities in order to make that economic stability going further?
You know that right now, you know that over the last 1 year, one major drawback is you know that our interest payments are rising. For example, right now in this current year, our revenues would be around 14,000 billion, and our public debt, that is around 67.5 trillion. So that is a big mess that your 1 year income, so for example your 1 year income and your debt is around 5 times more. So definitely you can see the pressure in last budget, where you know that half of the budget that went to interest payment, and in this budget government has allocated around 9.7 trillion, 9,700 billion that will go for interest payment. So I think in future this is a thing where we have to make serious intervention, because
serious
you know
interventions, this debt servicing, right?
Debt servicing,
the kind of amount that has to be paid as the interest on the principal amount, right? So I'll come back to you to have your understanding regarding what could be those interventions regarding in order to address this particular problem. Now, Dr. Ahmad, now 13%, the pledge made by Finance Minister regarding next 3 years when it comes to tax to GDP ratio. What specific, there has been a shift in a tax policy this time around, as already discussed by Dr. Farooq. Now, reaching to that milestone of 13% tax to GDP ratio, what specific bigger measures that you can identify should be taken in order to reach that milestone?
Well, frankly, this particular budget was rather, it came in a difficult time because we are, you know, going to IMF and all these restraints. What I could see apparently is that they increased taxes and especially, I mean, like where there was previously there was kind of exemption, not exemption, but the tax was not its normal level. For example, exporters, the tax used to be 1% of turnover. Now it's been raised to normal tax regime. Second is on retailers. Again, it is, I didn't see real concrete measures. It seems like that the previous voluntary measures are being more strengthened. So let's see how successful it is. But these were some of the sectors which were previously, one other sector was agriculture, which is more provincial. But I don't see really provinces taking much. For example, Punjab has only fixed a target of rupees 3.7 billion. It's neither here nor there. Similarly, Sindh government only rupees 6 billion. You know, it's very little. So agriculture has been, I think, spared both by the provinces as well as by the federal government.
So you talked about retailers. Now, the finance minister in that very press role talked about around 42,000 retailers getting themselves registered. How big a step that is? And what bigger a dividend is associated with the registration of such a huge number of retailers?
The fact that retailers and wholesalers are almost 18-19% of GDP, but they were not really paying anything. So if they are able to net these 42,000, what you just mentioned, perhaps it's a big step forward, yes. I mean, they've been trying for years and they never got here. So it seems they're a little more serious than they were in the past.
So regarding the Tajir Dost registration drive, this particular registration has happened under that particular drive, Taj Dost registration drive. How important was that particular step? So this registration, there would be definitely, this would be considered as a facilitation towards the retailers in order to make them voluntarily register themselves. So how important that one is?
It is very important, but I think they will have to see the government resolve, because previously these retailers and wholesalers have been able to pressurize the government to step back. But this time it seems that the government is more determined.
Okay, so Dr. Farooq, what's your understanding as the registration of 42,000 retailers under the Tajir Dost registration drive is concerned?
You know that we have made a lot of attempts in enhancing the base of our filers, and especially that in the retail sector, as you know that our retail sector that contributes around 20 to 25% in GDP, but right now tax share is just below 2%, and same is with agriculture. So these two sectors require that major that intervention. For example, that in agriculture, again it is quite simple, because that people hold land, so you may import a tax on certain slab that okay, if you hold this percent, this number of acre land, this would be the tax that you have to pay. That is the real dilemma when you go on the retail and trade side, because that the number is quite big. But I think now we have certain data. For example, that in recent census 2024, the government in census, they have conducted the entire mapping of this wholesale and retail activities. So I think first that you have to in, for example, in ECC, the big pressure is that that there are certain trade unions, there are certain pressure, and as Manzoor Sahab has highlighted that previously whenever the government have taken the initiative, that there was strong retaliation and strong pressure, and there are certain strikes. So I think let's in ECC take the provinces on board, and there are certain principles, like for example that they have the electricity bills, they have certain that rented agreement. So start with minimal taxes. I think that is another thing, that whenever we announce the policy, there could be certain that misconceptions and confusion. So I would suggest that first target should be that let's do the registration. When you have the data, automatically that then FBR may have a proactive role, that okay, people are earning this much of amount, and you government would be in better position that what sort of taxes. Right now that there are certain positive in points, and you can see the data that some people's, for example, if government have blocked the SIM, people's were forced, and such sort of behavioral changes that must become that, where that people's must have shown the responsibility, and they must
right. Dr. Farooq, now there's been also mention of digitalizing the Federal Board of Revenue to close the leakages, cleanse corruption, and avoid the thefts. How important that is, and it's also been mentioned by the Finance Minister, end-to-end digitalization of the FBR. You already talked about the data.
I would. Yeah, I would suggest that that there are a lot of policies where that we talk about digitization. For example, you can see that there is State Bank policy, that is the Rast account, where State Bank aims to digitize the economy, and that FBR alone cannot be digitized unless we will not digitize the whole economy. So there should be certain again that policies cannot work in silo. Recently I visited the China, and I can give you the example that China is the unique country where when I try to spend some 50 that RMB on some shop, the shopkeeper don't have the change. So he's saying that I don't have the cash. So they went purely on cashless economy. This is unique economy. Even for example in USA, in Australia, in Japan, you know that cash is working, but in China that is not working. Again, you know that the government has created an environment where all this digital atmosphere is working. So I would suggest that, okay, that is fine that you have to digitize the FBR, but on this other side you have to digitize the whole economy, because right now 75 to 80% of our economy that is informal. So alone, you know that, for example, if I digitize the FBR, and the, you know that you can see lot of certain attempts have been made over the last 2 decades. But for example, I could suggest you that right now there are certain G2P amounts and P2G amounts. So let's do through, for example, QR code, etc., where enforce the people, for example.
So what do you, what sense do you make of this particular thing when the minister says, if this digitalization is successful at the FBR, it will be implemented in other institutions as well to ensure compliance and fill the gaps? Is that exactly what you are suggesting also? I mean, bringing in.
I would suggest that go beyond that statement. For example, you know that right now alone BISP, Benazir Income Support Program, that will disperse around 600 billion amount. Let's try to establish certain digital channels through which people receive this amount. Similarly, there are a lot of subsidies, there are a lot of public to government amounts. For example, you know that people are paying taxes, people are paying, you know that fees against CNIC, against passport, and against various other services. So I would suggest that let's change the whole ecosystem where I don't have to go with cash, I don't have to go with even debit card or credit card. Let's do all this QR code, and India, you know that you may see the Indian Aadhaar card model, where you know that 60–70% of the household they have been digitized. So now you know that even a ready barn, even a Kiryana store, they are using all this digital platform. So okay, do in FBR, but do in whole financial ecosystem.
Right, Dr. Ahmad, now the minister also talked about the simplification of the process of tax collection and the tax refunds, talked about how this particular process is done abroad also when it comes to the salaried class. What's your understanding of that regarding the simplification in order to get the maximum out of?
I think it's not a big problem for the salaried class, because it's normally is deducted at source and it's normally digitized, and so that's not a serious problem. But the problem is elsewhere. When you know a private person tries to file, they find it very complicated, and especially, I mean, if it's a big large unit, they have a tax consultant something, but you filing the income tax yourself is a big challenge. And I think what they've done is, what they're doing is, immediately I think even during the budget time, Prime Minister called a meeting with McKinsey and others experts, and they said, you know, he would like all this digitization at a very fast pace. He would like it within a year or so. So I think the government is doing everything they can to fasten the pace.
It's talked about this specifically when we talk about the salaried class, the taxes are deducted at the source.
Yeah,
so
mostly.
That's what he had talked about, how things happen abroad. So isn't that principle also already in practice here? We've seen the taxes are deducted at the very source.
Yes, in case of salaried, and most of these are, but maybe he was referring to the private sector. Perhaps there, you know, I think there are many, if it's a you know, small establishment, they pay them in cash, etc.
Okay,
maybe that's the problem.
The thing which I am curious about, if there are certain departments or where the salary is deducted at the source by the concerned department, shouldn't that naturally be filed with the FBR? Why the person has to file the returns separately when his taxes are being deducted at the source?
Well, they have it. FBR has it, and you can always look at your, you know, when you're filing the return, you can look at your data that FBR has received so much. But then there's other income. So an individual could be work, you know, salary, but he could have some property. There could be all sorts of other income, you know, so that you have to, so for that purpose, and also if you sell a house or you buy something, so for that purpose you have to file it.
And then he says, the minister says that if one buys, when you talk about getting or selling the property, if one buys or sells a car or property, they send those amendments to the tax authorities and they will send a form detailing the final tax. A 2 to 3 day process, and that is it.
Yes.
So
yeah.
that is automatically registered with a concerned taxing authority, isn't it?
Yes, yes. But previously that wasn't the practice. That's what they want to get there. You know, if somebody sells or something, so it's automatically, it gets reported, and so there's some linkage there between, say, the excise office where something is sold and you change over the ownership, or, you know, these other agencies where you report a sale or something. So linking of those, so that one cannot hide.
So linking would be done through digitalization.
Yes.
Is that so?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, Dr. Farooq, now giving the example how things operate abroad when it comes to the deduction of taxes at the very source for the salaried people.
You know that when we talk on digitization, so for example, you know that in abroad countries where economy is quite formal, for example in USA or in China. So for example, whenever I am earning something or I am spending something, government no. But here you know that, for example, even I am doing some investment, for example, $32 billion is going in real estate, government does not know that who is investing, where it is investing, and you know that there are certain DC rate and there are market rate, and we have conducted one study that DC rates are some 5 to 6 times less. So you know that there is some sort of you know that. First, you know that you have to observe that in your labor market right now 74% of your employment that is in informal sector, and only you know that 25-26% are in formal sector. Again, when you decompose this 25-26%, again a significant you know that component that is working in private sector. For example, you know that people are working in manufacturing, in industries. Now the real issues come. For example, if you go in a factory, they have made 2 balance sheet. One is for the government and other is for you know that for actual. And in actual, you know that they are, you know that, so basically, you know that there are tax cheating, and again we say that okay, there are issues, and you can link it with GST even, that our GST is weak enforcement because you don't have the point of sale machines where you know that every balance sheet that okay, raw material is coming here, this is the output, this is the wholesale market, this is the retail market. So here digitization that would matter. And I would suggest that when digitization of economy would process that, for example, if you start the amount P2G or G2B with certain QR code, with certain, every person have the account. Right now, you know that, for example, if I go in Islamabad, 95% you know that retailers, they would prompt me that I pay in cash rather than you know that through credit card. So bring this atmosphere that where I have the incentive to pay digitally. When I have this you know that incentive to pay digitally, the government would have a record of each transaction. So right now you know that this transaction record that is missing. So that is creating anomaly, and ultimately you know that there is tax theft and some policy initiatives you know that would compromise.
Okay, so there is another phenomenon of being a filer and a non-filer. There's been so much talked about. Now there is a clear differentiation. It's been categorically been spoken by the finance minister that he doesn't understand why would such a category of a non-filer exist in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. As I have mentioned earlier that we are the country where we have only 5 million filers out of 240 million population. So again, you know that why this is low percentage. Again, there could be certain, you know, that behavior on demand side and again behavior on the supply side. For example, you know that Manzoor Sahab said that tax filing procedure is quite complex. For example, if I am filing my annual return, I have to hire some consultant, I have to pay something, and ultimately you know that I cannot file. For example, I hold education, you know that I know IT, but the dilemma is that the system is too much complex that okay, how I file, how that I can portray my right information, that is again a big mess. So here FBR must come. They should create awareness, they should educate the population that okay, this filing that would ease your life, that would ease your business, that would ease that overall economic environment. Again that why I file. So right now, for example, if government is imposing, for example, certain measures that okay, if you will go abroad, if you know that you will get certain amenities, you must have to file. Even I would say that even for example in electricity, let's place the tariff that okay, if you would not be filer, but you have to simplify the process. Right now filing is adverse than non-filing. So these sort of behaviors.
So that problem can be overcome by simply digitalizing the thing.
Simply digitize the things, and that you have to make data integration. For example, if I would spend some penny, it must come in government record. So for example, there should be point of sales, there should be that certain that cashless economy. In cashless economy, then government would be, and data is there already. Data is there. For example, government know the data, who is purchasing the car, who is selling the car, who is that purchasing the property, but that you have to digitize all this data.
Now the minister has talked about taking the punitive measures, the measures against the non-filers taken to the punitive levels. Your understanding regarding that? Again, for example, if I am sitting in a rural area and I am a landlord, what measure the government can take against me? The government must have to make certain behavioral aspects and push me, give me incentive. Why wouldn't a landlord pay? I mean, could you elaborate, shed a little bit more light?
Right.
What is the stumbling block in making a landlord not pay for that?
For example, that you can see the data. For example, in agriculture, you have 20% share in GDP, but contribution from tax, that is just 2%. So again, that the first, that is a provincial subject. Again, you have to coordinate with the provinces, and that is another thing, that right now provinces are getting too much share from the federal budget, and provinces don't have to bother because they have enough money from the federal government. Right now, you may say, you can see that federal government is quite poor and provincial governments are quite rich. So certain that agriculture side and certain other taxes, provinces must have to take the responsibility. They have to come forward.
Right. Dr. Ahmad, now this particular another aspect, what's your understanding of this, taking the measures against the non-filers to the punitive levels?
Well, it means that previously maybe, if the tax on something normally was 3%, for non-filer was 5%. Now it's taken from 3%, non-filer 20% or 30%. So it's so punitive, it's so high that there's no choice but to become a filer. That's what it is.
Right. So talking about the real estate sector on the supply side, that was being taxed now. It was taxed on the demand side already. So how is it going to make headways?
Well, it was, but as Dr. Shujat was just saying that previously, even now, see, they have various DC rate. For example, everyone knows that this plot cannot be, less than 2 crores. But if you go to the office for registering, they would say 50 lakhs because that's the DC price. What they need to do is bring whatever the the market value. They should know the market value because, for example, if you are say in England or any other country, every single property that is sold any year their price is declared. You can just go on the internet, anybody's house, you can look at this, how much was it sold. So that should be the same here. But what they need to reform is that here they kept the tax rate too high and the price low, so that it's not. So what they need to do is bring the rate lower and do the actual pricing. They have to reverse this. The current system is terrible. So because that encourages black economy. So if you sell an apartment for or anything for say 10 crores, because if you go for that DC rate, Okay, you can show 1/3 of it. And how do you account for the remaining? And that's government should look into.
Right, Dr. Farooq, now cuts in spending, three important areas mentioned by the minister, that is PSDP, 1.5 trillion, pensions 1 trillion, and 800 billion rupees on redundant departments. So PSDP specifically, and he has also said that it's a huge amount. How to deal with that particular amount, specifically talking about PSDP first?
You know that, for example, if I look the budget, this is ambitious target that government is committing that they will increase 50% PSDP. So basically, you know that PSDP is investment on infrastructural projects. So right now, you know that you can see that in this budget we have some 1.6 trillion commitment in the PSDP. On a reduction side, you can see that you know that there are 2-3 major you know that things. One is you know that interest payments, and that is around close to 10,000 billion. Second is you know that still pension is a big bump, and you can see that in this budget pension allocation is more than 1,000 billion. So another thing is you know that is state-owned enterprises expenses. I would say that you know that, for example, on expenditure side, still our policy is quite meager, and still we are not successful. Still you know that in recent budget our expenditure in total budget that have been increased by 21%. So that you know that 21% is you know that still big hike. Yes, on pension side we require certain pension reforms. You know that in next 5 to 6 years this amount will go to around 3,000 billion from 1,000 billion. So you know that again, like interest payment, this amount would definitely increase, and government have no cushion. So ideally the government must you know that get rid from this pension ownership, let invite the private sector. For example, in Western countries you can see that there are insurance companies, there are financial systems, so they offer certain incentives. And you know that when when an employee joins the government, pension is the least priority. For example, in Punjab, you know that right now you are giving the jobs to teachers and other peoples, and you are not giving the pensions. Okay, that is fine. So pension must be there, but it should be through you know that private sector and through financial banks and insurance companies. Why? Because you know that these companies, these financial system, they must have the savings. So definitely they would come in stock market, they would invest. So definitely savings would increase. Right now this pension saving, that is a liability on the government, it is a double sword. On the other side, you know that expenditures are rising. Still I would suggest that we have to cut the federal government size after 18th constitutional
So I'll come to this particular second point that you've just mentioned, talking about the pension side. Now you have suggested that it should be through public-private partnership, or such a financial system should be brought in through the private sector. So I just am curious to understand, when talking about the pension being a big liability for the government, and if it has to be transferred towards the private sector, why would private sector be interested in order to have that endeavor firstly, or they would be naturally interested to have that endeavor done, or the problem lies only with those entities which are loss-making entities? Am I correct on that?
Jawad, there are two things. One is the losses of state-owned enterprises and the liability, you know, that the of the workers and employees who are working in these state-owned enterprises. Second thing is the pension. So for example, if you have to privatize the state-owned enterprises, you have to finalize that, okay, what would be the fate of PIE employees. And there are certain models and you know that government is thinking that, okay, whatever the amount that would come from the privatization, you will give certain incentives, like for example golden handshake schemes. Earlier these sort of schemes have been introduced, like for example when we privatized the PTCL and for example HBL, etc. And you know that employees, they were compensated properly. Second thing is the pension. Pension, you know that with passage of time, pension is basic, for example, right of a, you know that an employee. we have made it a luxury thing. For example, you know that especially on officer side, bureaucrats, judges, etc., etc., you may see that pension has become a too luxury thing, that okay, we will give certain, you know, that monetary benefits, we will give certain non-monetary benefits, we will give medical allowances, we will give certain, you know, that utilities, etc., etc. So that's why you can see that 2 years ago this pension bill was 700 billion, this year it is 1000 billion, in next few years it will go to 3000 billion, and you know that right now if you will take certain steps, it require at least a decade to reform
Right.
the process.
Let me quickly take a quick comment from Dr. Ahmad on this particular point. The suggestions made by Dr. Farooq, your understanding regarding
You see,
that.
if you look at any other country, I mean, this pension fund is normally funded. What happens is that the government contributes a part, the person concerned contributes a part, and whatever the fund is gathered, so they give it to a private investment fund, insurance companies, so they invest it in stock market or whatever. And so by the time the person retires, this money is gathered. Here, it's all unfunded. This because there's no system. The person maybe doesn't contribute, and everything falls on the government. So they have to do something about it. Otherwise, as Dr. Shah was saying, it's just climbing like that.
Right. We are now joined by another participant on Skype. Dr. Khaqan Najeeb is former advisor at the Ministry of Finance. Dr. Najeeb, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Now, starting with this particular question, there's a pledge by the Finance Minister at the end of the fiscal year 2023 and 24. He made an important presser. In the next 3 years, he aims to have that tax to GDP ratio to 13%. What measures do you suggest could be taken in that particular direction in order to have that particular milestone met?
So, Jawad, if we were to think of the present budget in terms of taxation, of course, the time was short for a new government to frame something different than what we have seen. And then there was the IMF engagement, of course. I think a lot of people don't know, but you go back a few months, in December 2023, there was an IMF mission to Pakistan, which was specifically on tax. And a lot of these things were decided. A report was shared with Pakistan. I don't think that report has been made public. This was in the caretaker time. So a number of things that you've seen now, for example, sales tax exemptions going away, what you've seen on the property side, what you've seen on the salary side, what you've seen on the retailers and wholesalers, a bit on the, as you guys were just discussing, on the real estate side, and something on the exporters. So all this is, I think, part of the discussions that the team has had with the fund. In the short run, I think the fund also went ahead with these things, and the government tended to agree. But I think in the long run, these things are okay, maybe to, enhance our collection by, a percent of GDP. Let's say we ended this year at 8.8% of GDP. We may go near 10.5% if all these measures are put in place and, we have the kind of autonomous growth that we do. But, moving from here to a 13% target is something that needs to be done, I think, in a very different manner. And when I say different manner, let me explain this. So, these are taxations of the 90s, 2000 era. This is past today. This taxation on, how we do on the customs, the complexities on withholding taxes, changing the rates. So now we have to start thinking about, how do we create vertical and horizontal equity in the system. So if you currently look at this, we put all the pressure on the federal government. Look at the two provinces which have the agriculture income tax. Their total tax collection for the next year that is envisaged in the budget is a mere 9.5 billion rupees. How can a country which has 22 to 23% of the GDP coming from agriculture have this, paltry amount? Then the real estate, we've taken it to 15% in terms of capital gains tax. I think we still need to really, really think about this. And the reason I say that is that on the incomes, we are now saying in the bigger bracket, you're charging 39% in terms of the income tax. And you're letting me free by charging 15% on the capital gains tax. So you have to start thinking about it in a different manner. Similarly, so we have agriculture income, we have the real estate income we've talked about, and thirdly, of course, the retailers and the wholesalers. Yes, we've registered 42,000 out of the 3 million. Maybe we'll have a fixed regime. The government is still waiting on what kind of regime they want to come through. But eventually in the next 3 years, if we want to move into the 13% bracket or so, we have to think about the horizontal equity and the point of sales tax, as well as the income tax regime, which is normal, which we have done on the exporters this time, though a lot of people don't agree with this, but I think that's a good move that the government has made. Then getting out of transactional taxes. Pakistan has gotten this, system into a lot of transactional taxes. Pakistan needs to think away from transactional taxes into taxation on incomes that are created in the country. So if Pakistan then thinks about removing the complexities, I think this is 2001 a tax code that we used. We've done so many changes in them. It's become so complex. So, easing off there. And then, of course, Pakistan is a seriously data-rich country. I have your travel data, I have your electricity data, I have your gas data, I have your car buying data, I have your property data. Beyond digitalization, Pakistan needs some seriously good digital scientists who sit and do this work. When I file my taxes abroad, we get a pre-populated taxation structure, a taxation framework. So the next 3 years should be defining this kind of framework. So easing compliance, easing transactional taxes, broad basing taxation in the areas as well as on the number of people, and then reducing the taxation on especially now on the people who are wage earners, because we do have exodus of people and we don't want that. Another taxation that we have to start thinking differently about is the taxation on AOP. On the 10 million income, we've taken it to 50% or near 50%. I don't think that's the aim. The aim is to get more and more informal economy. This is your informal economy into the formal economy. So in the short run, we've gone with the fund, we've gone with the things that could be done, the people who are already in the tax net, but broad basing in the next 3 years and getting all these incomes on horizontal equity would become extremely important. And then the role of the provinces. The provinces saying that we've done a tax-free budget, for me, that's not good enough. They have a number of key taxes. GST on services is with them. Property taxation, the proper property taxation is with them. Motor vehicle taxation is with them. Agriculture income tax is with them. So they have to take a large chunk of this and revitalize the whole system, the PRAs, the way they collect these kind of taxation. That's the real potential of Pakistan if we want to move forward. The other area which you were talking about, and if you want, we can discuss, is that expenditure reform has to take precedence over the taxation reform.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
So I think the
I think we've got a little bit of distortion as far as the connection with Dr. Khaqan Najeeb is concerned. We'll try to reconnect with him and take his view regarding as to quite a positive hope expressed by Finance Minister Mohammad Aurangzeb regarding a larger and longer extended fund facility with the IMF. Dr. Farooq, a successful completion of the standby arrangement, hope expressed this time around by the Finance Minister that this particular program might be, or would rather, as per his hopes, would be the last for Pakistan. What steps are required in order to have this IMF program, and it could be the last one for Pakistan?
Yeah, I think we should be positive. Very simple, that first the message should be quite loud and clear to every segment of the that society, whether it is business community or population, public, that we are going to make certain changes. First, again, I would say that we have to make a balance between growth and inflation. Inflation, that is a big thing that is hurting the population. So we require a modest growth. In this year, we are projecting 3.6%. I wish that we could achieve, and we could achieve the targeted 12% growth. Second, that is the Dr. Manzoor area, and that is export. Again, without export, without that dollar earning, we cannot ease our external the deficit. Third, so definitely we have opt export oriented approach. Third, as I mentioned earlier, that government expenditure, okay, we are working on the tax side. That is good thing that 40% taxes are increasing. Again, we are pushing public that on direct taxes, etc., on indirect taxes, but again, government expenditure, that here we require a major surgery, whether it is state-owned enterprises, whether it is untargeted subsidies, and whether it is government size. After 18th Amendment, we have to reduce this federal government size. And last, we have to avoid mini budgets. That sometimes these create uncertainty. And Dr. Khaqan has said that provinces have to take on their responsibility.
Right. Dr. Ahmad, what's required to have this IMF program as the last one?
I think that perhaps the finance minister didn't. He mentioned three things: energy reforms and taxation reforms and state enterprise privatization. But I think the key lies, as Dr. Shujat was just saying, trade. We need to open up our economy, and that's how other countries were able to do. You have to increase your exports. There's no shortcut. I mean, if we are always short by about 20-30 billion, and we can borrow 1 or 2 years, but in the long run, it's the exports. And unfortunately, people don't think about exports. That's the problem.
Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, Member Task Force on FDR and Tax Reforms, former Ambassador at WTO, and Dr. Shujat Farooq, Chief of Research at Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. Thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.